As the world sleeps, a different kind of hero rises to keep things running smoothly. Those who work the night shifts. They brave the darkness, ensuring that life continues uninterrupted. Yet, the cover of night often hides more than just shadows. Tonight, we uncover two terrifying tales of night shift workers who encounter unspeakable horrors. First, we follow a worker in a manufacturing plant who faces an inexplicable and malevolent presence that threatens his very life, turning his routine shift into a fight for survival. Then, another night shift worker, toiling away in a warehouse, finds himself pursued by something sinister and unrelenting. What begins as an ordinary night becomes a terrifying ordeal that he may not escape. These dedicated individuals, like many others, set out to perform their duties, but instead stumbled into a world where nightmares come to life. They don't realize it, but they just stepped into the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I've always considered myself a night owl, which is why the night shift at the old manufacturing plant seemed like the perfect job for me. The pay was decent, and the hours fit perfectly with my late-night tendencies. I never imagined that a routine shift could turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. The plant, built in the 1950s, was an enormous structure that hadn't seen any major upgrades in decades. It was mostly automated, which meant only a skeleton crew was needed during the night to keep things running smoothly. On most nights, it was just me, an older guy named Larry, and a security guard, Mike. The three of us had our own sections to patrol, and we rarely saw each other until the end of the shift. It started like any other night. I clocked in at 10 p.m. and made my way through the dimly lit corridors to my station. The hum of machinery was constant, a background noise that I had grown used to over the months. The plant had an eerie vibe at night, but I usually brushed it off. There was something about the stillness that could make anyone feel uneasy. Around midnight, I noticed something odd. One of the machines in my section, which should have been operating smoothly, was making a strange, irregular noise. It was a thumping sound, like something was caught in the gears. I grabbed my flashlight and headed over to check it out. When I opened the maintenance panel, I found nothing unusual. The noise stopped as abruptly as it had started. I chalked it up to a glitch and went back to my rounds. An hour later, the noise returned, louder and more insistent. This time, it was accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible whispering. I paused, listening intently. The whispers seemed to be coming from the dark recesses of the plant, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I called out, thinking it might be Larry playing a prank. There was no answer. I decided to investigate further, walking deeper into the plant's labyrinthine corridors. The whispers grew louder, but they were still unintelligible. It was as if multiple voices were talking over each other, creating a cacophony that sent chills down my spine. As I rounded a corner, my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with the flashlight, tapping it until the beam sputtered back to life. When it did, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. It was quick, barely visible, but it was enough to make me freeze. I called out again, my voice echoing through the empty halls. This time, I heard a response. It was a low, guttural laugh, echoing off the walls and sending a wave of dread through me. I turned to run back to my station, but I was disoriented and couldn't remember which way I'd come. The plant's layout was confusing at the best of times, and in the dark, it felt like a maze. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent. I could feel a presence behind me, the sensation of being watched becoming unbearable. Just when I thought I was completely lost, I saw a faint light ahead. It was the control room, a small glass-enclosed office where we monitored the plant's operations. I ran towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the door, I heard the laugh again, closer this time. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, collapsing into the chair and trying to catch my breath. The control room felt safe, but the monitors showed nothing out of the ordinary. I checked the cameras, expecting to see Larry or Mike, but the plant appeared empty. I grabbed the radio and called for Larry, but there was no response. I tried Mike next, but he didn't answer either. Panic started to set in. I was alone, trapped in the control room with something lurking in the dark. Suddenly, the monitors flickered, and the screens went black. The power was still on, but the cameras were down. I could hear the machinery outside, the thumping noise returning, now accompanied by the whispers. They were right outside the door, growing louder and more frenzied. I scanned the control room for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a heavy wrench lying on the desk. I picked it up, gripping it tightly as I moved towards the door. The whispers were almost deafening now, a jumble of voices that seemed to be speaking directly into my mind. Just as I reached the door, the power went out completely, plunging the entire plant into darkness. The emergency lights kicked in a few seconds later, casting an eerie red glow over everything. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I knew I couldn't stay in the control room. I had to find Larry and Mike, and we needed to get out of there. I opened the door cautiously, peering into the dark corridor. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I stepped out, wrench in hand, and made my way towards Larry's station. The corridors seemed longer and more twisted than I remembered, each step echoing ominously in the silence. When I reached Larry's station, I found it empty. His tools were scattered across the floor, and there were signs of a struggle. I called out for him, my voice trembling. No response. I moved on, heading towards the security office where Mike should have been. The plant felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing closer with each step. As I approached the security office, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, raising the wrench defensively. In the red emergency lighting, I could just make out a figure standing at the end of the corridor. It was tall and gaunt, with long, stringy hair hanging over its face. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me. "Larry? Mike?" I called out, my voice echoing back at me. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its head, revealing a face twisted in a grotesque grin. Its eyes were dark pits, and its mouth stretched impossibly wide, filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the figure. It took a step forward, then another, moving with a slow, deliberate gait. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silent plant. The figure's footsteps followed, a steady, relentless pursuit. I reached the security office and threw open the door, slamming it shut behind me. Mike was there, slumped over his desk. I shook him, trying to wake him up, but he was unresponsive. His skin was cold to the touch and his eyes stared blankly ahead. I felt for a pulse, but there was nothing. Mike was dead. I grabbed his radio and tried calling for help, but all I got was static. I looked around the office for anything that could help, but it was clear that we were on our own. The only option was to try and get out of the plant and find help. I moved back to the door and listened. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel the figure's presence outside. I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on the wrench, and slowly opened the door. The corridor was empty, but the oppressive feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I made my way towards the nearest exit, my heart racing. The plant seemed to stretch on forever, each step taking me deeper into the labyrinth. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, echoing off the walls and filling my head with their unintelligible chatter. Just as I reached the exit, I heard the laugh again, right behind me. I turned to see the figure standing just a few feet away, its grin wider and more menacing. It reached out a hand, long fingers curling towards me, I swung the wrench with all my strength, but it passed through the figure as if it were smoke. The figure laughed, a low guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. It moved closer, its eyes locking onto mine. In a desperate bid, I turned and ran through the exit, bursting out into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I was far away from the plant, the whispers and laughter fading into the distance. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. When I finally looked back, the plant loomed in the distance, dark and silent. I never went back. I quit the next day and moved to a different town, leaving the nightmares behind. To this day, I don't know what I encountered that night, whether it was a ghost, a demon, or something else entirely I can't say. All I know is that it was real, and it's something I'll never forget. My name is Ethan, and what I'm about to share happened during my time working the graveyard shift at a local warehouse. It was a job I took on to pay off some debts, and it quickly turned into something I'd never forget. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a thick forest. The building itself was massive, old, and creaky, and being there alone at night had a way of playing tricks on your mind. There were always strange noises, pipes clanking, distant thuds, and the wind howling through the gaps in the walls. But you got used to it after a while. At least I thought I did. One night, I arrived at work around 10 p.m., just like always. My tasks were pretty routine, organizing inventory, processing shipments, and making sure everything was ready for the day shift. I'd been there for about 6 months, and the monotony of the job had become almost comforting. But this night was different. As I was walking towards the entrance, I noticed something strange. The lights inside the warehouse, which were usually dim and flickering, seemed to be off completely. I tried the switch near the door, but nothing happened. Great, I thought. Another power outage. The place was prone to them, especially during storms, but it wasn't even raining. I grabbed my flashlight from the locker and made my way inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows upon rows of stacked boxes and crates. The silence was unsettling. Usually there was some background noise, the hum of machinery, the distant chatter of night shift workers. But tonight, it was dead silent. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. It was a soft, almost imperceptible whispering. I swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and the endless rows of inventory. I shook it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and continued with my tasks. About an hour later, I was in the back of the warehouse, stacking some heavy boxes. The whispers started again, only this time they were louder, clearer. It sounded like multiple voices, speaking in hushed tones, but I couldn't make out any words. My skin started to crawl, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. No response. I turned around, shining my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. Just the oppressive darkness and the faint sound of the wind outside. I decided to take a break and headed to the small break room near the front of the building. As I sat down with a cup of coffee, I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind or the old building settling. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My break was cut short by a loud crash coming from the back of the warehouse. It sounded like a stack of boxes had toppled over. I rushed to the source of the noise, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran. When I got there, I found a pile of boxes scattered across the floor. They were heavy, and it didn't seem like they could have fallen over on their own. As I stood there, surveying the mess, I felt a sudden rush of cold air. It was so intense that I could see my breath in front of me. The whispers started again, louder and more urgent. This time, I could make out a few words.
"Get out."
My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't imagining things. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me. Panic set in. I needed to get out of there, But I couldn't just leave the warehouse in this state. I decided to clean up the mess quickly and then call my supervisor to report what had happened. As I bent down to pick up the boxes, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps, getting closer and closer. I spun around, flashlight in hand, ready to confront whoever was there. But there was no one. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the whispers ceased. The silence was deafening. I felt like I was being watched, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I quickly finished stacking the boxes and made my way to the office to call my supervisor. As I reached for the phone, and the lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness was almost blinding, but it was a relief. I dialed the number and waited for him to pick up.
Hey, it's Ethan. There's something weird going on here tonight. The power went out, and I've been hearing strange noises. I think someone might be in the warehouse.
There was a pause on the other end of the line.
Ethan, are you sure? We haven't had any issues with break-ins. Could it just be the wind or the building settling?
I don't think so. It's more than that. I heard whispers and I felt like someone was watching me. It's hard to explain, but something doesn't feel right.
My supervisor sighed.
All right, I'll come down there and check it out. Just stay put until I get there.
I hung up the phone and sat down at the desk, trying to calm my nerves. I kept the flashlight close, just in case. The whispers had stopped, but the feeling of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the sense that something was very wrong. About 20 minutes later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing my supervisor was here. I walked to the front door to meet him, but when I opened it, there was no one there. The parking lot was empty, and his car was nowhere in sight. Confused and growing more anxious by the minute, I stepped outside to look around. As I did, I heard the warehouse door slam shut behind me. I turned around and tried to open it, but it was locked. Panic set in again. I was trapped outside in the middle of nowhere, with no way to get back in. I pulled out my phone to call my supervisor again, but there was no signal. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I needed to find a way back inside. I walked around the building, looking for an open window or another entrance. As I rounded the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall and thin, with long, bony fingers and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. It was watching me, unmoving. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the figure. As I did, it started to move towards me, its movements slow and deliberate. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I could hear it behind me, the sound of its footsteps echoing in the night. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, my lungs burning and my legs feeling like lead. I found myself at the edge of the forest, the warehouse a distant silhouette in the darkness. I turned around, expecting to see the figure right behind me, but it was gone. The silence was overwhelming and I felt a surge of relief, but my relief was short-lived. As I stood there catching my breath, I heard the whispers again. They were coming from the forest, surrounding me on all sides. I felt a hand on my shoulder and whipped around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could make out the words clearly now.
Leave now, or you'll never leave.
I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to the warehouse, hoping to find a way inside. As I approached the building, I saw my supervisor's car pulling up. He got out, looking concerned.
Ethan, what the hell is going on?
I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. I just pointed to the door, and he quickly unlocked it. We went inside, and I collapsed onto a chair, shaking uncontrollably. He looked around, his expression growing more serious.
Ethan, You're not the first person to experience this. We've had reports from other night shift workers about strange occurrences, but we didn't take them seriously. I'm sorry you had to go through this.
As he spoke, the lights flickered again, and the whispers started up once more. This time, they were louder than ever, filling the room with their eerie chorus. My supervisor's face went pale, and I could see the fear in his eyes.
We need to get out of here.
He said, grabbing my arm.
Now.
We rushed out of the warehouse, not looking back. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the figure standing at the entrance, watching us leave. Its eyes seemed to burn with a malevolent intensity, and I knew that whatever it wasn't done with us. I quit my job the next day and never went back to that warehouse. I don't know what was haunting that place, and I don't want to find out. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, and the feeling of being watched, of hearing those whispers, will stay with me forever. If you ever find yourself working the night shift, alone in a dark, isolated place, be careful. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And if you hear whispers, or feel a presence watching you, my advice is simple. Get out. Get out while you still can. Another 2 creepy stories have come to an end. Are you ready to do a night shift? Drop a comment with your thoughts. And if you have a story that's even more terrifying, send it over. And always remember, the real monsters hide in plain sight. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, sleep well.